Hello, you. Salutations. Thought I would go ahead and make another video. I want to try to do this regularly, at least once a week, maybe twice a week. And I had a few things I thought might be interesting to talk about. Stuff I mentioned in the previous videos. And I have a stand now for my phone, so the camera won't be as wobbly. Of course, I plan my videos to be more of a podcast style. So the video itself and the visuals probably don't matter that much. I can do a little bit of editing, but not a ton. But I thought I'd talk about what I plan to read, and I want to mention some more of my favorite authors and kind of what interests me in making YouTube videos. So of course, I mentioned in my previous two videos, my two favorite authors are Bernard Cornwell and Wilbur Smith, neither of whom are probably going to be remembered as, all-time great authors or anything, although I love them. And I caught a video by Steve Donahue talking about this. I think he was talking about Stephen King specifically. It might have been an older video of his, but I remember him talking about this. But I don't imagine either one of those authors are going to be incredibly remembered. But I plan to continue reading them. Bernard Cornwell has another short novel coming out that I'm going to pick up and read. And I don't read a ton of new stuff. My back catalog of stuff I want to read is so great that I rarely pick up new books. At least stuff that's, newly released. But anyway, and I just, Bernard Cornwell, both, and Wilbur Smith's the same too. They're very pulpy kind of writers, which is kind of what I like about them. Historical fiction is my favorite genre. And Wilbur Smith specifically doesn't even really write in any time periods I find like super interesting or my favorite, but I just like his books. They're just fun action adventure stories. I'll talk about some in general, like The Mercenaries, which the American title I think is the Dark of the Sun or something like that. It has a different title. The American release does, but that's a really great book. Maybe I could talk about one of those, but something like that, or When the Lion Feeds, which is his first one. I could talk about some of those sometime. But both those authors have a huge catalog of books that I find a lot of fun. My favorite, Bernard Cornwell. I really like his King Arthur trilogy, and I'm reading it right now. So I could talk about that a little bit. So I just finished Enemy of God, which I have right here. So I recently picked up the whole trilogy of books. I didn't own them. I read them. Well, I didn't own them in hard copy. I own the digital versions, and I've talked about this some too. But most of the books that I read are digital. Like that's just really how I do it. I own books. You can see I own lots of books here. I have more in the basement. I have bookshelves full of books. But I probably don't own as much as most people, at least most reader types on YouTube, according to what I see, is I have tons of books. But anyway, but yeah, I turned a few facing forward. Some of my favorites of Mice and Men. I put this book. I mentioned this in one of my videos. Of Mice and Men is one of the books that really made me love reading. It was really that, Tarzan of the Apes, and The Three Musketeers. But I remember in school we had to pick out a book. And I picked that off the shelf because it was of Mice and Men. I'll grab it right here. You can see how little this thing is, right? It's only about 80 pages. You can read this thing in an afternoon pretty easily. But I picked it because it was literally the smallest book on the shelf. And I was like, oh, I'll read this one. And then I ended up, really loving the book. And ever since, I'll buy 4 or 5 copies of that thing and just hand them out to people to try to get them to read. So I'll be like, just check this out. It's really short. And a lot of people will try it because it is short. So anyway, but, I got Wolf Hall up there. I love Wolf Hall. The whole series is great. But anyway, so I just finished Enemy of God. So I read The Winter King recently. And it's a reread for me. I read it for the first time about 10 years ago. Yeah, about 2014 is when I read it. And I had seen it had a bit of a resurgence on YouTube over the last year or two, ever since the TV show came out. And so I decided to reread it. And I loved it the first time I read it. It's different. It's different than your typical King Arthur story because it's a realistic take, like a real grounded take on it, which I think has a lot of potential. But so it's different than your typical King Arthur story, and that's what I really like about it. So it's about as historically accurate as you could be for a King Arthur, an Arthurian story. It's kind of made me want to read some more Arthurian stuff. I know there's a one that recently came out. I can't remember that. It's like Lex Grossman, or he recently released an Arthur book. So I might read some more Arthur stories. I mean, I've read, other Arthur stories before, like The Once and Future King. But it's I might read some more just for a comparison. But what I've read so far in my reading career, it's Bernard Cornwell's is my favorite. Even though I've heard some people I like on YouTube not maybe love it as much as I do. In particular, I remember Steve Donahue mentioning it's not his favorite Bernard Cornwell work, but I've always really loved it. There's stuff I've noticed this reading around that I realize isn't perfect, that I didn't quite catch the first time, but I still love it. I still think it's a super great book and a great story. There's just a lot of interesting stuff. Arthur is a flawed character in it. He's a good person and is an honorable to a fault, which may sound familiar to some people if you've seen Game of Thrones or read A Song of Ice and Fire. I think it's pretty obvious. That and Pillars of the Earth, along with some other stuff, had a big influence on George R. R. Martin. I don't think George R. R. Martin would even hide that. He's a known Bernard Cornwell fan. He's talked about him a couple different times in interviews. He once there's a quote of him saying that Bernard Cornwell writes the best action, in fiction. And I think he might be right about that, at least in my opinion. But there's a lot of really great scenes in Enemy of God. I held it up already. There's hints at magic, and that's one thing I think is a flaw of the book. Is I think Bernard Cornwell makes it too obvious that the magic isn't real, and I don't think that was necessary. Honestly, I think most people would realize that there's just too much coincidence and circumstance for it to actually be real magic. But that's neither here nor there. It's still very good. It's just, I think that's a little heavy-handed. There's all these other contradictory things that say this magic isn't real. Like you didn't have to make that obvious. But regardless, I love Bernard Cornwell. He's by far my favorite author. Even though my favorite book of all time is War and Peace. But I've probably said that. I know I said that in one of my previous videos. But it's the greatest historical fiction book ever, and it's fantastic, and I've probably read it 5 times in my life, and I will read it again. I'm a big believer in rereading. But I thought I'd talk about a little bit about what I plan to read, and I got a little bit of a haul some books I picked up. This is actually everything. One, I picked up the Mordor Chronicle trilogy by Bernard Cornwell, which I got up there, but I just showed Enemy of God, but I got the other 2 as well. But this is Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is the Penguin Classic of Clark Ashton Smith, which is a collection of his short stories. And then The Half-Drowned King. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that author's name, but I've heard this is a very good book. I'm pretty sure the author's Norwegian. But I've heard it's really great, so I plan on reading that soon. I read The Hunchback of Notre Dame a little earlier this year, probably 4 or 5 months ago. Hunchback of Notre Dame's great. I had read an abridged version of it before, but this was the first time I'd read it all the way through, and I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's better than Les Mis. That's just me. I like Les Mis, but this Hunchback of Notre Dame, if you've never read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, read this. If the only thing you know about it is the Disney version, read this. I'm telling you, it's a fantastic book. Like, it's great. It's not even that big. It's about 500 pages. Like, that's not even a very big book. So you can read it pretty quickly. I plan on reading this Clark Ashton Smith pretty soon too. I got a real fascination with the pulp era fiction. So that's Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft. But I've been wanting to check Clark Ashton Smith out. I'm going to read some Dashiell Hammett too. There's some collection of his short stories. I read The Maltese Falcon a couple years ago. That's the only Dashiell Hammett I've read, but I've heard Red Harvest is very good. I've heard it's better than Maltese Falcon, so I'm going to I'm gonna read that. Then there's some short story collections he has out. I'm gonna read. This Half Drowned King I plan on reading soon. The next book I'm gonna read is Gates of Fire, which is just a really well known historical fiction book that I've never read. So I'm gonna read that. And Pompeii by Robert Harris. I've been meaning to get to both of those, and both of those are pretty well known historical fiction books. So those are coming up for me. And then I'm going to read Musashi, which is written by a Japanese author. I don't have the author's name in front of me, but I've been wanting to read that for a while. That and Taiko. I love Shogun, so I'm finally going to pick Musashi up and read it. I think it'll be pretty good from what I'm seeing. I've seen several YouTubers mention it. Steve Donahue's mentioned it quite a few times. I think Michael K. Vaughan has. Those are the two booktubers I watch the most, are Michael K. Vaughan and Steve Donahue. Steve Donahue has a lot of the similar opinions as me, although we don't see eye to eye on everything. But I would say probably 90% of the stuff he says I agree with. Every once in a while he'll throw something out there that I'm not so sure about. But, for example, the adaptations of books tend to be better. I actually agree with that. I think that just tends to be true. If you take an honest look at a lot of these books, like Jurassic Park's a great example. The movie's way better than the book. Jurassic Park's not a bad book by any means, but Jurassic Park is a classic, and Jurassic Park the book is going to be forgotten. So it's Michael Crichton. That was one of the first authors I really read significantly, like went out to try to find his books and read. So Michael Crichton's got some good stuff. He's an entertaining author. He's got the one that's about the two archaeologists. I should read that again because I remember that being pretty good. But they're basically digging up dinosaur bones and stuff, and they're like competitive with each other. But it's pretty good. I've been wanting to read Pirate's Latitude, so maybe I'll check that out too. But yeah, so Musashi I plan on reading soon. Half Drowned King, Clark Ashton Smith, Dashiell Hammett. There was another book I was going to mention. I'm going to read Gates of Fire. That's what I'm reading. That's what I'm going to read next for sure. Currently, I'm still reading the King Arthur trilogy by Bernard Cornwell, so I'm on the third one, which is Excalibur. I'm also reading The Abbot's Tale by Con Ingleton. I read a lot of Con Ingleton too. I don't like all of his stuff, but I read Falcon of Sparta like 2 months ago, and I liked it. His Genghis Khan series is great. I loved that series. I thought that was fantastic. And then his Julius Caesar one was okay. I wasn't as big of a fan of that. I don't even think I read the last one. I read like the first three and not the last one. And then I really liked his War of the Roses series too, even though there was a lot of Con Ingleton books that are not historically accurate. He takes some freedom with those, some liberties with those those details, but they tend to be entertaining books in general. But like I didn't like his Greek one he did recently. It was like it was the Peloponnesian War that he did. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But I didn't really like those that much. I think I DNF'd the second one. I just wasn't that crazy about it. He's got a Nero trilogy out. I might go ahead and read. What I want to get to also, I guess I can mention that too. I plan on reading that soon too. Is the Wilbur Smith Ancient Egypt series. I've never been crazy about Ancient Egypt, but I'm going to read it because it's Wilbur Smith, and I love Wilbur Smith stuff. So I'm going to reread some of it. It's been a while since I've read any Wilbur Smith. Probably about a year. So I reread When the Lion Feeds about a year ago. So I'm gonna reread some of his books and talk about them on my channel because I would really like for Bernard Cornwell and Wilbur Smith to not be forgotten. I think they deserve to be remembered somewhat. Maybe not as in the annals of history as all-time greats, but I just think they write good stuff. Oh, I want to read the Kingdom trilogy by Robert Lowe. I read the first one like 4 years ago, and I ended up I read something else and I didn't get back to it, and then I procrastinated, but I really liked it. But I've read quite a bit of Robert Lowe. I read his Oathsworn series, which is like a Viking series similar to The Last Kingdom. Then I read he had another one that's in ancient Rome that I liked. I didn't read the whole series on that one either, but Robert Lowe's another author I think deserves to be remembered because I think he's got some pretty good stuff. Like I haven't read his entire catalog, but from what I've read, the Oathsworn series is really good. I also want to get to the Amanda Scott Boudica series. It's like a quadrilogy of books. There's 4 of them. The first one's Dream and the Eagle. I think they did a good job with the titles on this book too. But I've been meaning to get to that for a while, so I might start that sometime soon. None of those are very big books; they're all about 400 or 500 pages, so nothing massive. Not like Musashi, which is 1,000 pages, and Taiko is too. And I want to read. I'm reading Musashi in this year, maybe not in 2025, but definitely. Maybe I'll start it in 2025, but I want to have it finished in 2026 or by 2026 for sure. I'll probably read Gates of Fire and Pompeii first, and then maybe some of that Clark Ashton Smith. I'm going to finish Abbott's Tale and the Bernard Cornwell Arthur series. I'm going to read his new Sharp novel, and then I'll probably read Musashi. So it might be a month till I get to it. I'm not the fastest reader ever. I can read a 400-page book in about a week. To give or take, sometimes faster, sometimes I can do it 3 or 4 days if I have the time. So as I said, I'm not a lightning fast reader. There are some YouTubers that read incredibly fast. Steve Donahue is a good example of that. I know a good way to practice reading fast is rereading books. So you do that, and you kind of get it makes you better at picking up plot without maybe catching every little tiny thing, where you can kind of predict stuff. And that's kind of part of speed reading. So anyhow, I don't know if any of that was interesting. I guess it was just a, TBR. I did want to talk about Wilbur Smith and Bernard Cornwell a bit. Because I'm gonna read the Age of Egypt series by Wilbur Smith, so I can talk about him some on the channel, and I'll reread some of his stuff. Maybe I'll do the Mercenaries, because I think that's a really good one. I really like it, at least, and I could talk about it. I kind of remember the plot enough just to talk about it, regardless. I think I've read it at least twice. So I guess so as far as collecting books goes, I guess the channel kind of gives me an excuse to buy some more books. So I want to pick up some of the Penguin Classics, the Black Spine ones. I think they're just kind of cool releases. So I'll start picking some more of those up. I'm going to collect all the Wilbur Smith and Bernard Cornwell books. I mean, those are some of my favorite authors, and the Robert Lowe books. So those are some things I'm going to pick up. As far as some other stuff I want to read too, and this would actually be pretty soon on my list too. Titan Press has released a whole bunch of new Conan stuff and Robert E. Howard characters in general. A bunch of short stories. I read the Cole one recently. I thought that was pretty good. It was only about 30 pages. I should have wrote the author's name down, so I apologize for that. As far as I know, it's the only Cole short story they released. There might be another one. But John C. Hocking put out a short story for Conan. They reprinted the Emerald Lotus as a double feature with this new book, the Conan book, The City of the Dead. So if you buy it, you get both of them. I'm going to read that. I'm going to read that pretty soon. That might be one of my next 3 or 4 books, because I think that looks really interesting. They also released a Solomon Kane novel, and they marketed it as the very first Solomon Kane novel ever. Because I don't think Robert E. Howard ever did a Solomon Kane novel. He only ever did short stories. So I'm going to read that. I'll just give it a chance. There's an author on Kindle Unlimited that has a Belisaria series. His name is William Havelock or Havelock. It might be Havelock. It's William something Lock. So apologies for that, sir, if you ever see this video. But your series looks really interesting. It's about Belisarius, which is ancient Rome, but later in the Roman Empire. It's the series I think is called The Last Roman. But yeah, Belisarius was one of the last great Roman generals. Really interesting story. This is like Eastern Roman Empire stuff, where by this time Rome is split in two, and I think the Western Roman Empire by that point isn't even really a thing at that point. Or if it is, it's a very much a shell of itself. So I'm going to check that out. I want to give him a try and check that series out sometime. I have Kindle Unlimited, so those books don't cost me anything but my Kindle Unlimited membership. So, and all you gotta do is start to cancel on them, and you'll get a discount for a few months. So, a lot of these subscription services do that. Audible does it too. So, I use Audible sometimes, usually for like the car and stuff. But it can be a good way to get some stuff and get some material in. So, anyways, so I hope some of that was interesting, and at least the camera's not shaking, right? Anyway, good night and good day.